Seizure of 11 kilograms is cause for serious concern to the Australian community, again reinforcing that harm issue. What this detection meant was the AFP forensic officers initiated a 2-week operation to safely remove and scientifically analyse the powder. Thankfully, Ambulance Victoria was on standby during the extraction and deconstruction phase of the operation for the safety of all officers involved. AFP forensic officers wore protective biohazard suits during the delicate and complex task of removing the powder from the lathe to protect against any inadvertent skin contact with the drug, which could cause harm, loss of consciousness, and even death. About 27 kilograms of the powder contained fentanyl, yielding just below a 30% yield of 11.2 kilograms of pure fentanyl. This is the equivalent of about 5.5 million potentially lethal doses of the 30 milligrams. Forensic officers also removed about 30 kilograms of methamphetamine in the same shipment from the lathe with an estimated street value of $27 million. There's no precedent to provide you with street value for fentanyl in the Australian market. People who use illicit drugs can never be certain of what they are ingesting. And this seizure highlights the potentially lethal game of Russian roulette they play. We don't want to see Australia joining the harm and effects to the community that are being experienced in other countries. Our concern is that if such a large amount of fentanyl was in the hands of Australian-based criminal networks, driven by greed, it could have potentially passed uncontrolled, hidden into the community with fatal results. Thank you. I might head over to my colleague from the Australian Border Force, Commander James Watson.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I've just got a prepared statement as well. James Watson's my name. I'm the Commander of Maritime and Enforcement with the Australian Border Force here in the southern region. On the 3rd of February this year, hard-working Australian Border Force officers discovered what would turn out to be the single largest detection of the highly dangerous drug fentanyl Australia's ever seen. Acting on suspicions in relation to a shipping container from Canada, ABF officers decided to send that container to our container examination facility here in Melbourne so that it could be further assessed. Inside the shipping container was a large and heavy industrial machine which was described as a lathe. The lathe was x-rayed, and ABF officers analysing the image, quite frankly, didn't like what they saw. The x-rays showed inorganic material where it shouldn't have been. As a result of that, it was decided to send the lathe for further, more intrusive examination to determine exactly what the substance was. Due to the size and weight of the machine, a forklift was used to carefully lift the lathe out of the shipping container so this more detailed inspection could be conducted. It appeared that the base of the lathe had poor quality welding and touch-up paint applied to it, which frankly just looked out of place. ABF officers who are trained in and practice in examining cargo without knowing its contents slowly and carefully drilled into the base of the lathe. On the end of the drill bit, they discovered a light brown substance. Filling the hole that they just made to prevent the possibility of the material escaping from the lathe, the officers then tested it, and it produced a presumptive positive reading for fentanyl. This drug is one of the more dangerous drugs that our officers can come into contact with, and so they acted immediately to set up an exclusion zone within the container examination facility. They increased their level of personal protection equipment that they would ordinarily use and set up decontamination zones to protect themselves and those that were also working on the site. The officers had been trained in the use of naloxone, which is a drug that can reverse the effects of exposure to fentanyl. We then called the Australian Federal Police and said that, look, you might want to come down and have a look at this. We judged from the images that the X-ray, from the images in the X-ray, that the detection was going to be large. But frankly, we were absolutely shocked by the size of the detection and the audacity of this attempted importation. The ABF, the AFP, Ambulance Victoria worked on site at our facility over the next few days to ensure that the drugs could be safely removed from the lathe and sent away for forensic testing. This was a massive amount of fentanyl, and the excellent work that the officers showed on that day prevented these drugs from reaching our streets, which has undoubtedly saved many, many lives. As you know, there's a fentanyl epidemic in some parts of the world, and you know about the thousands of deaths that are associated with the use of fentanyl, the illicit use of fentanyl every year. The impact of fentanyl has on users, their families, and the wider community can't be understated. Our officers work tirelessly to prevent this harm from reaching our streets because, quite frankly, it's often a case of life and death with this drug. The ABF know the methods criminals use to conceal illicit drugs and that are constantly evolving, and that's why our officers use advances in technology, intelligence, and their unique skills to keep on top of the latest methods used by criminals. This seizure is truly a great result, and we'll continue to work closely with our law enforcement partners to get on to go after the organised crime groups who seek to import these deadly substances. Thanks very much. Happy to take some questions.
How long did the extraction of the drug take? Are we talking it was just over the day, or was it days, weeks?
The drug on site took a couple of days to safely extract from at our container examination facility, and thereafter it was moved for a further site for additional testing.
If you just want to direct your answers to Sarah.
In total, the operation took about 2 weeks. That includes the scientific testing, but the actual safety aspect, the movement of the fentanyl is the key component here, not necessarily just the analysis, it's the exposure that our officers have had to deal with.
And you mentioned that it arrived in February. Why are we only finding out about this now?
It was actually in December now, because one, to alert the community to the harms of what fentanyl poses, but there's been a significant, complex and sensitive ongoing investigation into, unfortunately, the parasites that live within our community, such as organised crime, that it takes to investigate something like this.
Just to confirm, so you're saying February, was that something like part of the investigation, and then it was found in December? Or?
So the container arrived at our container examination facility in February. The shipment arrived into Australia, obviously earlier than that, but it was used early February. 3rd of February arrives at our container examination facility for assessment.
Okay, thank you. Where are you at with the investigation into how this came to be?
It's an ongoing investigation. Like I said, it's serious, it's complex, it's protracted. Without the help of our very good partners from the Department of Home Affairs and Australian Border Force, I'm not going to go into the details of the investigation.
You've obviously linked it to organised crime. Are you aware of what organised crime group is responsible for this? Do you have any suspicions?
Like I said, the investigation's ongoing.
Is this linked to Anon? Has that helped you in this investigation?
It's not part of this investigation.
Is there a concern there could be already fentanyl circulating in the community given this large shipment? Surely there might have been other ones come through.
Look, I think in terms of detections, I'll leave my Water Force colleague to talk about detections, but anything is possible.
Yeah, I suppose typically we would only see fentanyl being detected in quantities of 1 gram or less. So to have a detection that's 11 kilograms pure is just, quite frankly, extraordinary. It's an outrageous piece of the audacity of the group behind this is just, quite frankly, outrageous. You know, I describe it as a total act of bastardry, quite frankly. You know, the impact of this on our community, had it reached the streets, is just, it doesn't bear thinking about. Quite frankly, you know, we've all been living through COVID over the last few years. It's tough enough as it is, let alone to see this kind of impact reaching our you know, the streets that we live in. And that's why we'll work really hard with our law enforcement partners and our Home Affairs colleagues to prevent these kind of importations from reaching the streets.
Can you give us an idea? You did touch on it earlier about the impact that this is having overseas. Obviously, in America, fentanyl is very widespread. What impact is it having there?
Well, I guess those of us around will know the epidemic that exists around the world, and including our friends in the United States. The statistics of deaths associated with fentanyl around the globe are staggering. Now, fortunately, we're not seeing the detection of the sorts of quantities of fentanyl that might be being used around the offshore here in Australia. So this is why this particular shipment, you know, stands out well and above any others that we've seen to date.
If there was something I just might add to that, what Commander Watson said, is that that's one of the main purposes we're here, to alert the community of the harm effects of fentanyl, but there is someone out there in the community who does know more. So we're appealing to that person or persons who are there to speak up and call Crime Stoppers, please.
Have you made any arrests in regards to this?
Not at this stage.
The kinds of person that you're looking for to come forward, are they a user or are they somebody that's associated with the criminal syndicate responsible for the importation?
It could be anyone in the community. Someone out there knows something.
So clearly the scale of this importation indicates that international syndicates have recognised the potential for bringing fentanyl to Australia. Does that concern federal police?
It does, along with any other drug. It's a major concern.
Why do you think that they've focused on the potential exploitation of the Australian drug market?
Why? It's well known that the Australian community, unfortunately, pays higher amounts of money for all types of drugs that are imported into this country. So, you use that term that I used earlier, that organised crime are the parasites amongst our community, and they do it just for financial gain. And the harms that it leaves in the community and the health toll that it leaves and burden upon the governments, that's what the effects are, and that's what they're doing it for financial greed.
Final question.
Thanks very much.